Good afternoon and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Europe is facing a resurgence wave of COVID-19 infections. Countries, one after the other, are going into lockdown, prompting protests and, in many cases, incidents of violence. Starting with the Netherlands, which has been witnessing 3 straight nights of protests against COVID-19 restrictions. On Sunday, riots broke out across the country, with angry mobs clashing with police. 5 police officers have been hurt and 64 people detained in 3 provinces. Now, the latest unrest was sparked after the government imposed a 3-week partial lockdown last weekend after recording a record spike in COVID cases. Bars and restaurants must close at 8 p.m. and crowds are banned at sporting events. Sunday's unrest came after 2 days of violence in the Netherlands, which experienced its worst riots in 40 years earlier this year over a coronavirus curfew. Protests have also broken out in Belgium. Around 35,000 people took to the streets in Brussels to protest against restrictions imposed by the government to curb a rise in cases. Protesters and police clashed, with protesters throwing smoke bombs and fireworks. Police were forced to use tear gas and water cannons in some cases to disperse the demonstrators. Belgium tightened its COVID restrictions last week, mandating wider use of masks and enforcing work from home. Nightclubs may have to test their guests if they want to dance mask-free. Now, the COVID pass will become compulsory to eat in a restaurant or go to the theatre. As of Sunday, Belgium recorded over 26,000 total deaths due to the virus. Belgium has one of the highest cases per capita rates in the European Union, at around 1 per 100 people testing positive over the past 14 days.
We want our freedom, and being injected by something that's not tested well, being not able to work where you want to work, to be where you want to be, that's not where we stand for. That's not freedom, that's not where we live. We live in West Europe, and we just want to be free like we were before.
I'm here to come in I don't know how to explain it, but I'm here to fight the how do they call it? You know, it's discrimination. People get discriminated because the QR code. You know, people are vaccinated cannot enter some buildings because they only had one vaccine. This is the main reason we're here. You know, people get discriminated, and we don't want this.
The World Health Organization said last week that currently Europe was the new hotspot for the pandemic, while being the only region in which COVID-19 deaths were rising. The autumn surge in infections are overwhelming hospitals in many Central and Eastern European nations, including Ukraine, Russia, Romania, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. Now, for more on this story, we are being joined by our correspondent Ryan Thompson from Frankfurt. Good afternoon to you, Ryan. Now, let's start with Germany, which is considering compulsory vaccination as this 4th wave of COVID rages. What is the latest on that front?
Well, you know, many months ago, the Chancellor Angela Merkel said that there was no way that Germany would move toward compulsory vaccinations, even as we saw neighboring countries like France and Italy begin to require compulsory vaccinations for certain professions. So, of course, talking about public sector workers, or notably those who are working in hospitals or care homes. Germany said they would not follow such a step, but now, as they're facing one of the fastest upticks that we've seen in COVID-19 cases really in the entire story of this pandemic, well, the entire narrative is changing very quickly. Germany is worried about the situation they're facing at hand, and looking across the border at Austria, which did not push for vaccinations as hard as some countries did, and now thinking it might be a bit of a different story. But so far, the official line, at least from the Bundestag and from the Chancellery here in Germany, is that is not on the books just yet, but many local leaders and some in different of Germany's 16 states are beginning to think about this type of requirement, especially in those regions where the vaccination rate is so low, like Saxony and Bavaria.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Ryan, you did touch on Austria. Neighboring Austria has, of course, imposed a full lockdown. What is the situation on the ground in terms of the protests, and are people adhering to the lockdown?
Well, the rules went into effect from midnight, but people were not happy about this, especially in the build-up, because it was officially announced on Friday morning, giving people 3 days to prepare for these new types of rules, which would be in place until December 12th at the earliest, but could continue and really into the lead up of the holidays. The government has said they will reassess the lockdown every 10 days. They gave citizens 3 days to prepare for the lockdown, prepare to work from home, prepare to shut shops, prepare to close all sorts of public life, because this is one of those traditional lockdowns that we have seen in Europe before, these hard lockdowns where public life really grinds to a halt. Many people not happy about this decision because if you remember, the first type of lockdown was actually imposed last Monday. It was specifically targeted at the unvaccinated portion of the population, but with case numbers rising so fast, the government had to change course on Thursday and Friday and reimpose it for all. We saw about 40,000 protesters on the streets of the Austrian capital on Saturday, Vienna, really pushing for them to reconsider this lockdown in the remaining hours that were in place. Specifically, Austria is one of its most popular party, the FPO, has really joined protesters in this fight, saying they do not believe this is the right way to go against fighting a surge in infections.
Right, and the Netherlands and Brussels have seen some violent protests against the COVID curbs that have been imposed. Do you see the situation improving after these strict restrictions? And also on the protest front, can we expect more protests in the coming days?
I think Europe is at a point where restrictions are only in the cards. There is a surge of infections. The World Health Organization has issued its warning, and governments know that they are going to have to do something. Even in some countries like France, where the situation right now is moderately under control, there are warning signals going off, so there will likely be more restrictions. I mean, just for example, in France, in the past few weeks, we've seen them reimpose mask wearing in a lot of public places. It's hard to say whether protests will be coming or not and at what speed, because it is likely going to be based on the speed and the severity of restrictions that are imposed by regional governments. But of course, across these European countries, we've seen a lot of fiery scenes. People are angry about having to be subject to more restrictions that are designed to curb measures and effectively limit some of their freedoms. You just heard some of those sound bites playing before we came to me here in Frankfurt, and people are upset because many people did get vaccinated, they did their responsibility and listened to what the government asked them to do, and now they are being told that some of their basic favorite activities that they love so much, whether it be going to shop or going out to eat or going dancing at the simplest measure, are going to get a lot more complicated. And in a lot of sectors of public life, including here in Germany and other neighboring European countries, there's now the requirement that for some people who, even though they are vaccinated, even though they are recovered from the coronavirus, they will now likely have to get tested to do some of their favorite things.
All right, Ryan, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for being with us on this broadcast, bringing us the latest on COVID in Europe.
We are now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.